Right. Christmas.
Not on
Just
slideshow yet. Did you realise?
I don't know what you mean. This is a PDF presentation. But anyway, can people see a sheet with Christmas at the top and a Roman coin at the right?
It's
Yes.
fine.
Yes,
That's
yes, we
absolutely
can
fine.
see.
Yeah, that's what I'm aiming for. Right. Let's start off then. Christmas. When was the date set? There's debate about that, but probably towards the end of the reign of the Emperor Constantine. And I've got a Roman coin there on the right, struck in London, actually, in about 315 AD. Apparently, the first recorded celebration was 336 AD, although a lot of people think that it was actually set probably a century or so earlier. Christmas Day itself, of course, quite an important day, basically since Victorian times. And I just scroll down. On the right here, this is a drawing of the royal family shown in the Illustrated London News in 1848, and it caused quite a sensation. People think that Christmas trees were introduced by Victoria. Actually, she knew about Christmas trees because her grandmother was the German wife of George III, and she had brought Christmas trees with her. So she certainly knew about it, but her and Albert popularized it. Christmas Day was made a bank holiday in 1834. And around that early Victorian period, there were a lot of things that basically pushed Christmas right into the forefront. Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol in 1843. Carols had been around for some time, but that also revived the spirit of Christmas. The next sheet is, frankly, a bit of a cheat. I've got here the first ever Christmas card. This is actually a facsimile, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But basically, in 1843, a somewhat busy man, Sir Henry Cole, decided not to write letters to his friends at Christmas, which was certainly a custom at the time, but to have cards printed instead. And he got these cards printed in black and white. And then in those days, there was a profession called a colourer, and a professional colourer coloured them in, and they're very rare and desirable. I saw this on the front page of, I think it was Cavendish or Grosvenor, one of those sorts of auction houses, with an estimate of £5,000. And I thought, well, I won't go do that, but I will have a look at it. You can do online bidding these days, and this item open and closed at £13,000. So not in my collection, unfortunately. The next item is, though, here is a letter, almost certainly enclosing a Christmas card, sent from Newry in Northern Ireland to Belfast, with a date stamp of the 23rd of December. But the reason I've got it in here is it was received in Belfast on the 24th, but it's got this print on the back of the envelope, a Merry Christmas. And I'm fairly sure that a card would have been enclosed with it, although I haven't got that card. But this is the earliest example I have of a Christmas-themed item. The next item, I will just have to, if I can get this right. Yeah, this is a telegram form, and you can see it's cancelled by Limerick, the receiving office, on the 25th of December, 1884. And it's from a rifle brigade at Korti in the Sudan, writing back to their base, really, the Rifles Brigade at Limerick, wishing everyone a happy Christmas. It may or not have been a happy new year for the Rifles, because this was the time of the Mahdi uprising, and not long after this was sent, a relief column trying to get to Gordon was sent out, left Korti, where this was sent from, on the 30th of December, 1884. But as we all know, sadly got there too late. Now I've got to go back again, so just bear with me. Now this is a rather interesting little item. This was sent in December 1886, and it's basically a luggage label. And you can see here it was sent from Shaftesbury in Dorset to East Grinstead in Sussex. And it's basically a homemade Christmas greeting, I suppose you'd say, rather than Christmas card. And basically this is saying times are hard. This was in the period of what in those days later was called the Great Depression. We always think of that as the 1930s, following the 1929 Wall Street crash. But there were other depressions, and after a period of unrivaled prosperity, if you like, in the early to mid-Victorian period, the 1880s were a much harder time, and this was a card sent at the time. This is a real Christmas card now. I'll just take it down slightly. Yeah, one more, I think. This was post offices wanted to encourage Christmas for obvious reasons. And this was a postcard sent by the Telegraph Office in central London. And they would have sent these to all sorts of other offices. And it's interesting card. This is in 1889. This is a picture of the Telegraph Office on the card. And I found a contemporary print. You can see it's obviously the same building. And on the right here, you've got Morse and Wheatstone. Morse, of course, the inventor of the Morse code. And Wheatstone was a entrepreneur who was heavily involved in telegraphic developments. And on the right, obviously, the theme of empire. Here's Britannia. Sorry, on the right, Britannia. On the left, the theme of empire. And actually, the words Advanced Australia. The song Advanced Australia Fair was composed in 1878. And nowadays, of course, it's the Australian national anthem, but it didn't become so until 1984. So at the time, it was just a song, but for some reason, the designer decided to put it on this card. The next item is from Bechuanaland, British Bechuanaland. And this was sent in 1893. And the message on the back says, amongst other things, it's Christmas Day here. Don't know what it is in England. It's got a December the 25th cancellation for a post office in British Bechuanaland. And it's rather nice because at the time, British Bechuanaland, which later became absorbed into what became South Africa, used both British and Cape of Good Hope stamps, and you got one of each. So this is a prepaid internal postcard with a 3 halfpenny stamp on it, but it's been uprated with an overprinted halfpenny stamp to make a 2p rate. Not quite sure why it was uprated, because I believe at the time the rate was a penny for postcards. But anyway, rather nice item. And here on the back, it seems on the front. I mean, I think that is it's a seal, but I think it's a sovereign that the sender has used to seal his message home. And the last item in this little bit on Christmas as a theme is a little card from the postman, basically rather nicely saying, give us a tip, Gov. It's not dated. These were very common at the time, but quite hard to find. There were many of them produced, but I think most of them were basically thrown away. But from the uniform, it seems to be the late Victorian period. So, Chairman, that's the end of the section on Christmas as a theme. I'll now move on to Christmas cancellations, and then we can have a chat and take questions on either at the end. So let's hope this works. Right. Now, this one, this is a bit of an odd display because this is actually an A3 item, and my scanner is only A4, so I've had to stitch it together a bit. But this is the earliest December the 25th cancellation I've got, and you can see it there. And I'll just zoom in slightly. You can see there, this is a bishop mark. These were introduced in 1660, and for many years, they never carried the year. They just carried the month and the day. And you can see December the 25th here. And the letter is dated 1704. So this is a pretty early Christmas Day postmark. And it took a lot of, my wife had to help me. This actually says Dice Key. in those days, QUAY was also spelt KUY or KUYS. And I think I find the writing hard to decipher, but I think it was a letter from a boat builder in Boston, Lincolnshire, explaining why he hadn't done some work on a boat, and sent to this chap, John Moore, who I'm fairly sure was a wine importer. I found his name on some documents at the time. And if he was a wine importer, he'd need a quay. And Dice Quays was actually basically along where Upper Thames Street is nowadays. But a very early item with a Christmas postmark on it. If I scroll down, I'll have to, again, go back. Here we are. Now, I'll just reduce the scale again a bit. This is another early item. This is sent in 1780, and you can see another bishop mark here. But if you compare that to the previous mark, now the day is on the top and the month is underneath, but still no year on this mark. And this mark was sent to someone in London, and it went from Woodstock. And you can see a fairly scruffy 3 here on the front. That was the postal rate at the time from that, because in those days, of course, postal rates were all about distance. And from Woodstock to London, I checked, and 3d was the correct rate. Now we come to an Edinburgh bishop's mark, and you can see that this one, which was sent in 1783, after the bishop mark in London had now got the day at the top and the month below, still kept to the old format. The font is quite different, but this was sent from Perth to Edinburgh, and it's got a 3 on it. Sorry, a 2, and that was the correct postal rate at the time for a distance of less than 50 miles in Scotland, and Perth, from where it was sent, is about 45 miles. So a rather nice and different postmark there. This one is different again. This was sent from Chorley in Lancashire to London, and this is apparently an unrecorded, so the previous person who wrote it up said, that actually says 207 Chorley. You get a lot of these mileage marks where particularly the mileage to London is recorded. And according to Google Maps, Chorley is 210 miles from central London. So that would be a mileage mark, presumably applied to a lot of mail going from Crawley to London with a 6 on it. And that was the rate to be paid, obviously, on delivery at the time. I sometimes do a little bit of calculation. Sixpence in 1787 is about £4 today. The post office is trying hard, but it hasn't quite got to £4 for a first-class letter. No doubt it will in time. And here on the back, you can see not a very good copy, but that's the postmark, the receiving postmark when it arrived in London. And now the bishop's mark format has gone, and you have 2 circles. Now you have the year. You can see the 87 here, and December the 25th. And this form of mark was common for a number of years. Here's another item from Scotland, again with an Edinburgh style, indeed, bishop mark. And that was applied on receipt. And there's a very faded mark there, which might be a 2. And 2d this was sent from Glasgow to Edinburgh, and 2d was the rate at the time for that journey. Interestingly, it was sent to a chap who was a banker, and there's 1 or 2 more like that. And on the rear here, you can see, we haven't seen this before, a very straightforward circular Glasgow mark in 2 rows, actually. And later on, that changed. Here's another Scottish one, again with that mark on it. But this one, the interest here is that the rate is much more than the distance from the towns between which this letter was sent. And if I can just get to my notes, the reason was that you had to use post roads. and the so it was only 50 miles from Selkirk to Selkirk from Ayton, a small town from where it was sent. So that rate would have been threepence, but it's actually got a 5 on the front because it had to go via the post roads to Edinburgh, which was a much longer journey. And this is quite a common theme at the time. There were some famous examples. I think, if I remember rightly, Bristol to Gloucester had to go via London early on because the post roads were the only roads that the mail was carried on, even though obviously much closer just to go straight across. So again, as I mentioned earlier, this is another example of that Scottish mark, and they still have the month on the top and the day below. Now we get to another, this is a much clearer example of that double circle mark with the date now, 22nd of December 1798, but received on the 25th. This was sent from London to Edinburgh. I've got it upside down because I think it's better to see the postmarks that way. And this one took 3 days because this is a dispatch mark from London, 22nd, and it arrived in Edinburgh on the 25th. And they're still using the old bishop mark style to show receipt. This next item, you can see a Bridgewater with a mileage mark here. And it has an 8 on it. And this was sent from Bridgewater to London. And at the time, the rates changed 2 or 3 times in the 18th century. But at the time, the rate for 120 to 170 miles was 8p. And I've checked, and that was the correct for the distance. And you've got, I think I might just turn this upside down for a second. Just bear with me, because it's quite interesting. Just get this control right. You've got 2 receiving marks on the back, December the 25th, the London one, and then this one, also December the 25th, 7 o'clock. So this would have been what was in those days termed evening duty, or NT for night. This one was sent in 1801. I better reverse this, otherwise we'll have all sorts of problems as we get further on. Right. This one went from Warrington to London, and it was posted on the 23rd. It's only a wrapper. There's a Warrington mark there for the 23rd of December, and here's the London receiving mark for the 25th, 1809. So now you've lost the double ring with the date in the middle, and now it's just a single ring. And this style with various different formats it was very common for a number of years. Another early one. This is an interesting one. This went from Wetherby, and there's a 1 ounce mark there. And this is you can see here this inspector's mark. And I think what happened was that this was weighed and it was decided it was 1 ounce. Because it went for 3 and 8p, which was a lot of money in those days. The wrapper is dated in manuscript 22nd of December, and it arrived in London, you can see here, on the 25th. I won't go through that routine of reversing again. It takes a little bit of time, but there's a nice London receiving mark for the 25th. This next item, I find this quite interesting. And what's that additional half? Well, there was an Act of 1795 which said that all mail coaches were exempt from payment of dues at toll gates. And of course, the toll road operators hated this. Not only did they lose revenue, but the mail coaches were very heavy and tended to chew up the road. So there was a lot of pressure to change that act. And in typical political fashion, politicians don't change. The government of the day said, okay, we will change it, but only in Scotland, where there weren't that many post roads. but there were post roads in Scotland, and to recover the tolls which the post office had to pay only in Scotland, you paid an additional halfpenny, and this just means there's various forms of this mark. So you had to pay an additional halfpenny for any mail in Scotland, to or from. So this mail was actually sent from London, and that mark may well have been applied in London, actually. But you had to pay the extra if it was going on a road in Scotland that was a mail road. Sorry, which was a post road. And the date stamp here is the 25th of December, 1816. Another nice December the 25th, 1827. And you can see different post offices. So this one has still retained the central ring with the day in it and the year and the month outside. Some of these marks, we're not quite sure why. It may have been that the X there was just to denote the particular clerk who cancelled it. There's some debate amongst experts, and in which I'm certainly not one, as to exactly what these sorts of marks mean. And this one, I think, is addressed to Harlesden, and the chap it's addressed to was a reverend with a living that was owned by a Cambridge college, and 8 at the time would have been the rate from Cambridge to Harlesden. So I think it was sent from Cambridge. Not certain, but you know, sometimes you have to do a little bit of guesswork to decide where these things end up. The next item is a free hand stamp. Ever since the founding of the post office, until in fact, I think 1840, various privileged persons were allowed to use free mails. MPs and peers and various senior state officials. And this system was open to a great deal of abuse. MPs would designate letters as free and basically sell them in bundles. So there were all sorts of rules as to how you should control this. You're only supposed to send mail if it was within 20 miles of your constituency. You had to include the full name and address of the recipient to try and stop them selling blank covers. You had to sign it, and so on. Not sure it's met all the rules. I can't read that signature. And it was dispatched from Lichfield, but I don't think that signature is either of the two Lichfield MPs at the time. One was called Anson and the other Vernon. And it's addressed to a chap called Davis at the Travellers Club. And as far as I can tell, he's not an MP either. So probably a good example of abuse of the free mail system. As I say, that happened a great deal. Here's an example of a much more standard hand stamp. These are the sort of hand stamps that came in. This is from North Shields, a nice circular hand stamp, 25th of December. And I think the 283 is the distance. I think that's probably a distance to London, but this went to Carlisle, actually. And I think that's P8, so paid 8. You could pay on dispatch, although a lot of mail at the time, of course, was on delivery. But this one, I think, was prepaid and sent from North Shields to Carlisle. I think probably this didn't go to London and back which of course was a much longer route than across the Pennines to Carlisle. The P8, that's the rate for 50 to 80 miles at the time, which would have gone across the Pennines. So I think that probably is how that one worked. Another example of a different hand stamp now. This is what's called a London tombstone hand stamp. This one was sent from Gloucester. You can see the Gloucester hand stamp there, the 24th of December, 1835. And you've got a paid hand stamp there. Received, that's a London hand stamp. And I think that means that that they accepted it had been paid on dispatch and not on delivery. I think that's P9. I find some of these manuscript annotations really hard to read, but I think that's a P9. The rate at the time for 80 to 120 miles was 9pence, and Gloucester's about 115 miles from London. So I think sometimes you work it backwards. You say, well, the rate should have been 9. Do you think that's a 9? Well, possibly, probably, that was a 9. The next item is another example of free hand stamps, but a rather interesting one. The Free Office did not process mail on a Sunday, but it would accept mail. So this is a December the 25th hand stamp from the Free Office. And to denote that it was a Sunday, they put these little scallops all around it, if you can see. And then it was actually dispatched the next day. So here's a 26th of December, 1836, as it happens, hand stamp with a nice crown on it. The design of this hand stamp changed marginally several times. And again, an illegible signature. And whether or not this was a proper free hand stamp, who knows? Just to illustrate different styles of hand stamps, this next item was sent from a little village in Scotland called Dunce. And I think it was too small to process mail. So although it was received on the 25th of December, 1837, there's another Dunce hand stamp this next day, December the 26th. So I suspect that it was posted on the 25th, but not actually dispatched till the 26th. And then you've got other hand stamps on the back with a nice paid double ring hand stamp here, which probably means an evening duty. This one, I think there's a 9.5 there, and it hasn't got that half hand stamp that I mentioned earlier for Scottish toll roads. But I suspect that's what that was about. So the rate was 9pence to go to Edinburgh, and then the half, because presumably a post road was used in part of the time. This next item is rather interesting for several reasons. It was sent on December the 25th, 1839. It's a free one again, and I'll come back to that. But it's interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, this was in that very short fourpenny post period, which lasted from about 5 weeks, December 1839 to to January 1840. Penny black came in, of course, 6th of May 1840, but in the preceding months in that year, for most of the time, you could send mail for a penny. But for a trial period, they had the fourpenny post. Other reasons are interesting. This is actually addressed to a chap called George Wilson, who at the time was the secretary of the Anti-Corn Law Association, which later became the Anti-Corn Law League. And I suspect, and the letter talks about the Corn Laws, and in a way, quite an interesting example of contemporary history, because the Corn Laws were repealed later, and the Anti-Corn Law League eventually dissolved itself because its job was done. But this letter, very nice, very clear, St. Leonard's Council there, December the 25th, 1839. On May the 6th, 1840, the penny black came in. And here is a letter with a penny black, Maltese cross cancellation, and a Peterborough, December the 25th, 1840 cancel. It's also got a Peterborough penny post mark here. For some time after the introduction of the penny black, you still see these marks. In the end, they became more common in smaller rural post offices, just denoting dispatch. But they didn't need to put this one on because you've got the very nice Peterborough cancellation here. Anyway, a penny black on entire, dated Christmas.The, 1840, the first such day that such a cover would have, or an entire would have been received. And then I've got a couple of examples of mulberries, and I'll just scroll down to the first one, because this is one with a December the 25th, 1840 cancel for Wakefield. This is the mulberry. Rowland Hill believed that mulberries would be much more popular than adhesive stamps. And he was proved very wrong on that. And the cancellation is that I'm afraid my scanner hasn't picked this up very well. But to cancel a mulberry, you applied a Maltese cross on the figure here, and then you put postmarks on the back to denote dispatch and receipt. And this is quite a rare item. They're quite hard to find with the Christmas Day cancels on them. I've also got a mulberry with a December the 24th cancel, but I'll show it because here you get a much clearer idea of the design of the mulberry. This is actually very late. This is 1845. The mulberries came in 1840, were very quickly lampooned, and in 1841, the pink prepaid envelope was introduced instead. But of course, you paid for a mulberry; they were still valid for postage. So this one in 1845, by then, of course, the Maltese cross is no longer in use, and so you had to cancel with different obliterators. And this is a 67 with a German street marking underneath. So those are mulberries. This next item is interesting. This was also sent in 1840, and it's got on the back a lot of hand stamps showing its route. It arrived in London. It was dispatched on the 24th of December from Edinburgh, and appears to have arrived in London on the 25th, which was pretty fast, but probably in the evening. And then other hand stamps here. The other interest in this item was it doesn't carry a stamp. We're in the penny black period, and the reason is that until 1852, I think it was, and I think 1855 in London, you could still send mail to be paid on receipt. But to discourage that, you had to pay double the rate. And so here's a nice 2, which would have been hand stamped on this envelope, on this entire, sorry, because it didn't carry a stamp. This wasn't a tax mark. It was knowingly dispatched to be paid for on receipt, and you had to pay twopence, not a penny. And there's some rather poor cancels on the front, and then, as I say, quite a few cancels on the back. There were some very enthusiastic cancellers in London that day, obviously. Another paid item with a different paid mark. So here's a rectangular paid mark. So this one, no stamp, but a 1 on it. So if you prepaid, you could still prepay, and you prepaid the standard rate. So this was sent from Comber in Ireland to Dublin, and it was sent in December the 25th, 1843, and it arrived the next day. And there's the paid hand stamp to denote that there was no further payment necessary, even though it didn't carry a stamp. Another example of the 2, I've got 2 of these, and I'll whip through fairly quickly, but these were sent by a solicitor to various people in in Norfolk, talking about land holdings. And the reason was that they wanted to create an Act of Parliament to enclose and reclaim part of the Wash, and between Norfolk and Lincolnshire. And obviously they wanted to get the consent of various landowners. So this is a standard form, actually. And why has it got a 2 on it? Well, I don't know, but I'm fairly sure the reason is that the solicitor, Thomas Wing, who was actually a Lincolnshire lad originally, I think he sent them out to these landowners and wanted them to send it back. So basically said, I'll pay on receipt. So he didn't want to put stamps on in case they didn't send it back and use the stamp instead. So he was prepared to pay the twopence rather than the penny. And that's one example. And here's another example. And here's actually the Wash Act, the front page of that act. And I think quite a nice, again, an interesting example of social history and the sort of things that went on at the time. Now we come to, again, a different hand stamp. This is double ring, Hull, nice December the 25th, 1845 on it. And on the back, there's the Wakefield receiving mark. Again, no stamp. Again, a 1 to denote the payment, but no paid on it. But obviously it was accepted as paid. And I think you get a lot of variation in paid, prepaid, unpaid, and so on. But this one, it's very poor quality, but you can see the 1 there, and that was obviously accepted as prepaid. Another example of that double ring here, sent from Dalmuir, sent to Edinburgh, and it's got a too late mark on it here. And this is a Glasgow dispatch mark here, and an Edinburgh. They've completely dropped that old bishop marks, so now they've got the standard ones. Edinburgh, December the 25th, 1845. And I think what that meant was it arrived too late in Glasgow to catch the last mail train to Edinburgh. So it couldn't be delivered on the 24th, and it was actually received and almost certainly delivered on the 25th. This one is fairly standard in some ways. It's Darlington, and that's the receiving mark. 946 is the Middlesbrough obliterator. It's sent from Middlesbrough to Darlington. Middlesbrough was established by Quakers, and at this time it was a very fast-growing industrial town. But the reason I like it is this is all it says. Middlesbrough Estate Office, blah, 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 is requested that a sum of £2.11 is paid at this office in North Street before Saturday, being for rent and broken glass due to the Middlesbrough owners. And it's signed by a chap called J. Turner, and he's listed in the trade directory at the time as the clerk of the estate office. So what was the broken glass about? I don't know. I haven't been able to find any information about the addressee, but whether this was a pub and there'd been some damage or not, I don't know. I just found it a fascinating little letter. This is another example of long and strange routes. I'm no good with Welsh, but I think that says Llandyssi penny post, and Llandyssil is a tiny village in the Welsh mountains, and this is addressed to, you can't really see it there, but Aberystwyth. But it went via Carmarthen, and if you know Welsh geography, that meant and Monmouth. I think here this is Monmouth, and it seemed to go in a huge U from Llandyssi down to the south coast of Wales, along and back up to Aberystwyth. Why such a long route? Again, I think it is a post road issue. It's only about 50 or 60 miles, but I think it traveled about 200 miles. And nowadays, that by this time, of course, you're into the penny post period, so it's still a penny. Beforehand, if you remember one or two of those earlier examples, you had to pay for the distance, but now you just paid the penny. But this went on a very long route to get to its destination. And this Llandyssil penny post, this is totally obsolete now. These marks were to designate a very different setup, but now you've got a penny stamp on the front. But this was just used, I think, just to denote from where it was dispatched. They still didn't have a proper date stamp in Llandyssil at the time. This is an example of a duplex cancel. You can see the Bristol, December the 25th, 1855 here. Rather poorly perforated stamp. Perforations came in the Archer developed his machine in 1848. and 1850 on a trial basis perforation was introduced, but clearly it took some time to get things right. And this is 1855, Bristol local post, but with a nice duplex cancel on it. Now we come to something quite different. This is the post office, like it did on a number of things, it really underestimated the increase in volume that the penny post brought in. 1839, the post office processed 76 million items. 1840, that doubled, and it doubled again. So by 1850, there were 347 million items and over 560 million by 1860. So they were trying to improve productivity. And one of the things they did was to look at cancelling machines. And in 1858, 2 different machines were put forward, one by Pearson Hill, who just happened to be the son of Rowland Hill, so may have had a slight edge, and the other by a chap called Charles Rideout. And this is a Rideout cancel. So this would be a Rideout machine cancel. HS denotes Rideout. This was the first of 2 machines that he developed. And so a rather rare postmark there. And on the front, Liverpool duplex cancellation, December the 25th, and indeed manuscript, December the 25th as well. This is a letter to France. And again, this one, no stamps, but you can see the London paid mark here, a rather nice double ring, December the 25th, 1858, with, I think that's a French paid mark, and a French receiving cancellation there. This is, sorry, not French. This is a Calais transit mark there for the 26th of December. Obviously, the post from London at this time, it all went over to Calais. And at the time, there was a lot of debate over this. A contract for actually dispatching the mail across the channel was held by a couple of fairly unsavory characters. They won the contract in 1854. It lasted till 1863. And then there was a lot of acrimony. It was taken over by a rail company. Those of you who know Mowbray's book on foreign postal rates, it says that in the 9 years in which they operated were ones of graft, greed, and deceit. So this was in those 9 years. But anyway, rather a nice item. This is a very different marking here. This one, it says it's insufficiently addressed. It was posted in London on the 24th, and on the rear, there's a York, December the 25th hand stamp, but they couldn't deliver it. So December the 26th, it's marked insufficiently addressed. And Malcolm probably is going to correct me, but I think this is an Evening Midland Rail mark, the railway from London to York. I think that's an inspector's mark. I'm not certain. I know Malcolm knows a lot about this stuff, so when we finish, we're interested in his view on that mark. Now a couple of overseas items. This is a letter from Staines near London to Sydney, New South Wales. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 penny reds on it, all with duplex cancels on the front. A nice Staines, December the 25th, 1864 mark there. And there's a very scruffy and indistinct Sydney arrival hand stamp, I think February 1865, when it was probably 6 weeks, 7 weeks that mail normally took to get from London to Australia. But rather a nice item, and with lots and lots of cancels on it. Another foreign item, this one with a sixpenny stamp on it and a Dorchester cancel for December the 25th, addressed to a major in Secunderabad in India. On the back, there's these are rather faint, but there's a London single ring cancel on a Bombay 26th of January 1866 transit. And this one is a Secunderabad double ring receiving hand stamp for January the 31st. So it took about 6 weeks to get from London to the addressee. This poor chap was on a 9.5-year tour of duty. There was the Indian Army at the time, but there were also units of the British Army. I'm not too good on Indian history, but I think part of that was due to the fact, of course, the 1857 mutiny. And I think there are a number of British Army units that were stationed in India for periods of time. 9.5 years is a pretty long time, though, isn't it, to be away? I mentioned earlier about mulreadies and the fact that they didn't last very long. And here are two examples of what replaced them. The penny, pink penny prepaid envelope. This one with a Cheltenham stamp for December the 24th, 1864, and a rather faint Launceston in Cornwall, December the 25th receiving hand stamp. And this one with a rather nice Wellington, December the 25th, 1870 single ring hand stamp on it, in fact a duplex. And there's a very poor quality arrival hand stamp on the rear, which I'm not showing because I can't make it out myself. I've mentioned duplex cancellations a lot, and this is a standard example. And a lot of duplex cancellations were like this, with the horizontal bars and the registered number of the post office in the middle. But this is a different hand stamp. It's an Edinburgh hand stamp with a December the 25th date, but this is a star hand stamp, and you can see the number for Edinburgh there, but instead of those horizontal bars, there's just radiating lines out from the centre. And that was sent within Edinburgh with to Musselburgh, and there's a very clear and rather slightly different format Musselburgh receiving hand stamp on the rear. So this would have been posted and delivered on the same day, Christmas.The, in 1869. Here's another one that went to India, and this is a slightly different version of the duplex hand stamp we saw earlier. Now you've got postal district, so London Southwest 17 with a December the 25th hand stamp, and via Southampton going out to Bengal, and rather a lot of transit and receiving hand stamps on the rear. And my last item, a rather unusual one. I do like these when you get different stamps from different jurisdictions on the same envelope. And this one, Tuppenny Halfpenny Rosy Mauve, we're now in the, it's 1876, so we're just in the UPU period. So I showed the previous item had a 6p stamp on it. Now we're down to 2p halfpenny, the standard international rate, and addressed to Philadelphia and redirected to a town called Brookline in Massachusetts. And nice, it was sent from Sandown, nice Sandown cancel here. And then in Philadelphia on December the 25th, it was redirected. And I haven't done enough research on this yet. I presume the rules in the States were that redirected post you had to pay again. Quite often, of course, redirected post was just carried free of charge because the initial payment had been made. But this is a 3-cent stamp on it with a very smudged cancel, but a very nice clear Philadelphia, December the 25th, late at night, hand stamp on. And it went on to Brookline. And here at the back is the Sandown dispatch mark for December the 8th. So this took just under 3 weeks to get to Philadelphia. Chairman, that's the end of my presentation. I'm very happy to take questions, comments on either the postmark section or indeed the earlier section on Christmas themes. I'll leave the screen up for the moment, but if you want me to stop sharing, no problem.
Okay, Julian, thank you very much indeed for that. That really, I was very impressed with your clear, very excellent knowledge on all this hand stamps and marks. I must admit, it's really fascinating stuff. I did have